This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. We spent some time last summer, and at the time, I don't have 100% acuity or awareness, so it may be a little bit unfair or even self-aggrandizing to suggest that not enough people asked this question. But I was really struck last summer by the way in which the public discourse, the narrative, including from the very top of government, seemed to suggest that if those hideous, violent, vicious race riots had unfolded in the aftermath of an actual asylum seeker being accused of a crime, then that would somehow have been acceptable or expected. Do you remember? I mean, we really wrestled with this because no one really touched on it. The fact that the lies disseminated and perpetrated by all the usual suspects turned out to be lies didn't really touch the sides of our concern that if they hadn't been lies, these riots would still have been abominable and appalling. I mean, credit where credit is due to James Cleverly for pointing, Sir James to you, Keith, credit where credit is due to him for saying something that in modern Britain has possibly become slightly controversial, and that is that riots are always wrong. I don't think you need me to name-check the political figures or perhaps the political figure who just dances perilously close to denying that riots are always wrong. He might even just ask questions like, are riots always wrong? And then claim that he was just asking questions. So James Cleverly, extraordinarily for a conservative politician, stating something so simple, straightforward and true, he will come under fire for that. And part of the reason I know he will come under fire is because of people who are what I'm afraid we have to call permanently or terminally online. And there's a real problem here, because those of us who aren't probably can only underestimate just how toxic everything has become. I started talking to you some years ago about what would happen to your brain if you were fed an unleavened diet of people of colour from all over the world committing crimes. And then AI has exacerbated that enormously because some of the footage that's being disseminated online isn't even true. And the steps towards full-on radicalisation are now, it would seem to me, relatively tiny. You can move in the space of a few hours or a few days, perhaps a few weeks online, from being relatively mild-mannered and normal into being a full-throated, screaming despiser of everybody coming to this country via irregular routes, if you want to be technical about it, or on small boats, if you want to engage in the sort of vocabulary of our times. So when the government say, as they have said, the Prime Minister has expressed fears, I think, is the right word to use. And some politicians perhaps have expressed hopes that there would be a summer of riots in the UK if social cohesion were not enhanced and improved. You know that he's talking to and about only one section of the people who are minded to turn up outside that hotel in Epping. And he's talking to the ones that are more like you and me, I hope, than the people who are self-confessed and self-described white supremacists, the people who turn up to attack the police, the people that Suella Braverman told Nick yesterday she hadn't managed to actually notice, despite all the footage and all the coverage making it clear. The most powerful footage probably involves a mother, I presume, a woman who was there, shouting through her loudhailer, people of Epping, stop what you are doing. And she was shouting at the people who hijacked what I think you might describe as a legitimate process to pursue their racist and violent ends. And if you think I'm exaggerating, there were members of a neo-Nazi group called White Vanguard seen handing out leaflets at the protest that read, "Preserve the white race." You've got another organisation called Homeland, which essentially pursues I think it was set up by someone who left a neo-Nazi organisation. So make of that what you will. And an awful lot of people turned up there, as the police have told us, who had absolutely nothing to do with the area. Times reports one woman who lives close to the building in question saying that she'd been accosted by a group of protesters with an XL bully dog as she walked home during one of the protests. And when she asked them to bring the dog to heel, they began filming her and asking whether she supported the migrants. So there's a clear distinction there, isn't there? The people... Listen, let me tell you something, and this I think might help unravel some of this complication. If your 14-year-old daughter, if my 14-year-old daughter told me that a grown man had tried to kiss her, then I would be absolutely bloody furious. I don't know if it's odd to say. I would be just as furious if it happened outside Claridge's or outside the Oval Office in the White House, as I would be if it happened outside an asylum seekers facility in Epping. But I would be absolutely outraged. And that's why I think it's beholden on everybody to recognise the difference between these two camps, these two constituencies. If it was your 14-year-old daughter who had allegedly been assaulted by an asylum seeker, you would be very, very unhappy about having this facility on your doorstep. I think you would probably be equally unhappy if it had happened outside a co-op supermarket or a posh hotel or the Ritz. I know that I would. But when you turn up saying, we don't really want this sort of thing to carry on happening, you are making a legitimate protest, and you are, I think, the person to whom or about whom Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner are talking today. So that's two distinctions. You and me being told something by our 14-year-old daughter and wanting to do something about it, regardless of whether it was feasible or plausible or not. And, of course, we have to be careful discussing the case in question because charges have been brought. So, in the sense of something must be done, something has been done. But it doesn't take away the sense that more needs to be done. And then you've got your actual white supremacists, so people turning up in balaclavas to pursue the unfinished business of last summer when, of course, they were trying to set fire to hotels full of entirely, wholly innocent people. That's distinction number one. Distinction number two is this weird thing we've identified recently where people profess to be profoundly concerned about violence against women, whether sexual or otherwise, and yet seem supremely comfortable with it when it's undertaken by a certain type of person and absolutely outraged by it when it's undertaken by another type of person. You can, of course, invite a man locked up for beating up his own girlfriend into Parliament and defend him when he gets there, and also, of course, defend a politician claiming to regularly sexually assault women by describing it as locker room talk. So this weird dichotomy, if you like, of particular crimes being absolutely outrageous when they're committed by particular people, but excusable, defensible and absolutely fine when they're committed by a different type of person, in this case refugee stroke asylum seeker, is also something that Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner are perhaps missing or not being properly alive to when they make the comments that they have made. So you've got the distinction between concerned parents and white supremacists. You've got the distinction between the terminally online and normal people living their lives in the real world who do not recognise most of the depictions of this country that you will find online. There was an extraordinary interview on Sophie Ridge's programme on Sky News with a woman I hadn't come across before, but she's one of Farage's crew. And she was talking about visiting America and visiting cities that I'm pretty sure have got higher crime rates than we have, and apparently Americans are queuing up to ask and describe how awful things are here, which is, I live in Brentford. It's simply not true. Nothing is perfect. Some graphs go up, some graphs go down, but this profoundly unpatriotic attempt to paint our country as some sort of war zone has taken root on social media, and therefore it spreads into the real world when it is occupied by people that never spend any time in this wonderful city. So that's distinction number two, mums and white supremacists, online and terminally online. And then people whose attitude to a crime, to an alleged crime, seems to depend in large part upon the status or ethnicity of the alleged culprit. And I don't think Keir Starmer can reach half of those people. I don't think he can reach the white supremacists. I don't think he can reach the terminally online. And I don't think he can reach the people whose attitude to a crime is determined by the status or ethnicity of the culprit. A man who will excuse, for example, Donald Trump boasting about sexually assaulting women, but profess outrage at events that haven't actually happened when somebody like Andrew Tate posts about them on social media. And I could have got this completely wrong, but nobody is making that distinction. And I don't fully understand why. When you hear people like Suella Braverman claiming not to have noticed the violence that saw police injured and officers explaining how they had established where some of these people came from, you realise that this is not a conversation that has been conducted in traditional or even honest terms. And we are now going to see protests, I suspect, as we did last summer, outside facilities wherein nobody has been accused of anything. So Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner can't reach the people who are cross with refugees who haven't been accused of anything. I'm right, aren't I, about last summer? I wish I wasn't, but I am. That was the question to ask. What happens when somebody of that nature, somebody in that constituency of asylum seekers is accused of something? Will these people feel more empowered, more emboldened? Oh dear. And another problem there, of course, is that very simple picture of what you would do if your daughter told you, your 14-year-old daughter told you that a grown man had tried to kiss her. I mean, hand on heart, would you feel differently according to their status or ethnicity? Would you feel differently if it was the priest as opposed to the person in the asylum hotel? I can't say, thank God, because it's never happened to me. But I honestly don't think I would, unless, of course, I had fallen victim to the very deliberate attempts online and beyond to persuade me that everybody of that ilk, not the priest, but the asylum seeker, is a crime either in progress or waiting to happen. So her name was Louise Want, and she's given a very powerful interview to the Times, and it is people like her of whom I am speaking, because I absolutely no beef or problem with a mother objecting to an environment in which her children do not feel safe. So how does he reach her? You get the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister talking about the fraying UK. It's actually broken, lads. Someone should write a book about it. And the importance of improving integration and the repairing of the social fabric. It is another day when 14 years of austerity have taken away an awful lot of the tools that would once have either prevented or made it easier to fix these problems. But the difference between those six constituencies of people, the mums genuinely concerned for their daughters versus the white supremacists, the terminally online who get all of the their information from deliberately provocative sources, and those of us who are not terminally online, those of us who base our view of, for example, London on our daily experience of it, and the people who consider a crime to be better or worse according to the constituency or ethnicity or status of the person who has committed it. And that is what the government is charged with doing. There's a brilliant thread by my friend Elliot Higgins today talking about what happens when social media fills the vacuum that he calls it neoliberal meritocratic technocracy, and happily provides some explanations of what that means, because I wouldn't know without help. And the vacuum created is filled with outrage, distortion and division. And I'll share the thread with you on Blue Sky, and he provides an awful lot of background and information to how that is happening. And that's the thing, is that the government is seeking to address anger and unhappiness, and some of the angry, unhappy people are honest and sincere, and some of the angry and unhappy people, the ones most likely to set fire to things or attack police, or no, that's not even fair, the only ones likely to set fire to hotels or attack police or argue that everybody of a certain ethnicity or a certain status is wrong or other or inferior or dangerous or to be feared. How do government tell the difference? Because you're never, ever, ever going to appease the terminally online, the white supremacist, or the person who thinks a crime is different according to who did it. And yet, you quite rightly need to address the anger and unhappiness of the people who are not terminally online, the people who would be equally outraged if their daughter was allegedly assaulted outside Claridge's, as they would be outside a facility in Epping, and the people who want more to be done to ensure that those sort of scenarios don't happen. How do you tell the difference? 0345 6060973. And I think the question I'd like you to answer as well, if you can, is this. What would work? If you accept that you can't reach half of the groups I've just described, it's not half the population by any stretch of the imagination, but that doesn't matter, does it? It's often the loudest voices. You can't reach them. They don't want to be. And the worst thing that could happen, for example, to Nigel Farage is for the refugees to stop coming. What would he talk about in those circumstances? What would he talk about? Or if we had prolonged periods of completely peaceful cohabitation, what on earth would he talk about? So you're never, ever, ever going to be reaching the people who almost welcome this kind of conduct, or indeed who do actively engage in it. So how can politicians reach people like this lady, the one with the loud hailer outside the hotel in Epping, shouting at the top of her voice, "People of Epping, stop what you are doing," as a bunch of what the Times describes as revved up thugs charge police lines? I don't want this to be another radio phone-in where people who respectfully haven't got a Scooby-Doo about anything come up with brilliant ideas on how you stop people crossing the channels and risking their lives in dinghies. There's a time and a place for those. But I have to guard against it becoming that, because I am asking how you think the government can reach these people. How do you get past the masked racists, the terminally online, the people who don't really care when a white man assaults a woman but think it's the end of civilization as we know it when a brown man does, and reach women like Louise Want, begging, really pleading with so-called protesters that they stop what they are doing? I don't know. How do politicians do it? 0345 6060973. And Fred asked the question, if a white plumber attempted to assault anyone's daughter, allegedly, do we think anyone would target white plumbers as a group? And that's an important question, and it's rhetorical, and the answer is no. But we're not living in that world. We're living in a world where people are being encouraged to target everybody in a building because of allegations made against one person apparently living in it. How do politicians, or indeed the rest of us, reach the people who aren't determined and revelling in the violence, the division and the horror? Hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:23 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. People have a right to be angry at any alleged perpetrator, writes Lee, but the rest in the hotel haven't done anything. If it was someone in a block of flats that did the same thing, there wouldn't be a mob telling everyone, insisting that everyone in the block be removed. Whereas Mike says, are white plumbers being shipped? But see, Mike, what you don't realise is you bought into the idea that everybody is a wrong un if they are in a certain category, and you wouldn't do that with any other category. But Mike writes, are white plumbers being shipped over and housed in large groups and committing crime at higher levels per capita than white electricians? Because then I think it would be an issue, wouldn't it? I don't really understand the point that you think that you're making, Mike. There are loads of indicators for criminality. Most obviously poverty. Most obviously education levels. Most obviously special educational needs. Just because it's a bit like that bloke claiming that his autism was responsible for his appalling behaviour and tarring every autistic person in the country as a consequence. If somebody from a certain background does something awful, it tells you nothing about everybody else from that background. But, I mean, I think people that kind of reasoning is a lot more popular at the moment than I can remember it being. So what challenge does that set to politicians? 24 minutes after 10 is the time. Ray is in Vauxhall. Ray, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. I mean, just regarding your summary, I agree with a lot of it, especially about how a lot of the right-wing groups are bandwagon jumping on this, and including Reform. I throw that into that category also. But equally, I would disagree with your final point. Well, I would make the point that there is a genuine consensus. It's a growing consensus in this country that people of a certain background that are coming in either by boats or even, maybe not even necessarily by an illegal route, they seem to tie in their cultures with a risk to women and girls in this country. And I think that has been exacerbated hugely by the grooming gang scandal, where the majority of men in that were of a specific background. And my opinion is being formed, actually, and pushing me that way. And I would say to your researcher, the reason is that a young girl moved into our street last year from Bradford, and she recounted some experiences of her niece within those grooming gangs, and explained to me actually that the gang in question in that case was not majority Pakistani, but actually was Afghani and I think Sudanese. But her point was that those nationalities share similar cultures with Pakistani men because of I guess the religion.
And yet whether we like it or not, and the inquiry that Keir Starmer has ordered will look into disproportionality and may well find some. I mean, I think for the reasons you've explained, probably will. The massive majority, objectively, of gangs that abuse and rape young girls will be white.
Absolutely.
And nobody extrapolates from that negativity towards you and me. I'm presuming you're white, Ray.
I'm actually mixed race, so half Guyanese. But I mean, look,
So how do you address that? Because I mean, you could show me evidence, and I mean, you can't, but imagine that you could, that somebody from Afghanistan or somebody from whose parents or grandparents came from Pakistan, or somebody who's a Pisces, is 50 times more likely to engage in a certain type of behaviour than somebody who's not from those places, or who is, for example, a Capricorn. And it wouldn't change the fact that the massive majority of people in those constituencies, those categories, those star signs, are not the thing that the statistics are examining.
No, I think the problem I've got with discussing the subject is it's difficult to discuss it without feeling that you're giving sort of a free, in an open goal to a right-wing group.
Well, that's why I've made the distinctions that I've made today. And what I'm pointing out is that you can't reach the actual white supremacists who've been outside that hotel in Epping. You can't reach the terminally online who base their opinions on algorithms that are absolutely dedicated to scaring the life out of them. And you can't reach the people whose attitude to a crime will be different according to the status or ethnicity of the criminal. So how do you reach everybody else?
Well, I mean, I think you have to. It's important to do so because, I mean, just to say, reiterating the conversation I had with this neighbour who I genuinely believe she didn't have a racist bone in her body, but her views have become. I mean, I would make the point that she actually recounted to me that Britain, absorbs a huge amount of migrants every year, and they are from all sorts of backgrounds. We've had the Hong Kong immigration scheme, we've had the Ukrainian one. So the Christians mainly there. You get Hindus, you get Buddhists, you get, all sorts of religions coming in, and those people are not proportionately linked to this sort of crime. However, the vast majority of people we see on the boats that we see visibly are men, single men without children and families, and I would imagine that the majority of those come from the Middle East and Africa, and potentially of Muslim background. So that's where the problem. So you
are doing correlation equals causation, even though you know that you shouldn't, but you're being honest,
I'm trying to be honest
you're describing other people.
Until the statistics are done,
yes.
Nobody can answer that question, can they?
Is it a bit like... Well, no, because the statistics are not going to deliver proof that the massive majority of people who have come here from overseas are criminals of a particular nature, but it's a bit like that. Do you remember when one of Donald Trump's sons talked about M&Ms?
I don't know, actually.
And he said something like, if you had a bowl of M&Ms and some of the purple ones were poisonous. I may be misremembering this. Someone will remind me. Then of course you'd get rid of all the purple M&Ms, even if it was only 1% of them that were poisonous. And it was to my mind, it was a very stupid argument. But as I look back on it now, I wonder whether they knew exactly what they were doing. So how do you reassure that the woman who is asking the neo-Nazi rioters to wind their necks in and to stop attacking the police on this occasion, marauding groups of far-right activists attacking hotels last summer, you can't reach them as a politician, but I think we both accept there are people who need to be reached. Do we have the first idea how you reach them? Unless, of course, this then turns into a phone-in where we're all coming up with half-baked ideas about how to stop the boats. Well, I think that, first, if we accept that people have concerns about this type of immigration, so the call it illegal immigration, and the sort of people that may be coming in. If we first, but then you're already falling into the idea that they should all somehow be held responsible for the actions of a tiny minority.
No. I mean,
you wouldn't do it with any other category of people. You talk about people coming in. That's the category, right?
Yeah.
What other category of people would you say we should be wary of because some of them are dodgy?
Well, what I'm trying to say is, if it's accepted, and I am
going to ask you that question again in a minute.
Well, if it's accepted that single men of a certain background are more likely to be involved in that sort of crime.
So we're all single men of a certain background. You want to look at sex crimes, it will, I mean, maybe not single, but it will always be men. And there's probably a socio-economic breakdown on it as well. So you would not phone me up to tell me that we need to go after all white men of a certain age or a certain educational status, because the statistics have showed us that they're more likely than some men of a different age or a different educational background to commit certain crimes. You wouldn't do it. There's no other category of people where you would say it's not the maleness that's the problem, or it's not the crime that's the problem, it's the status or the ethnicity that's the problem, while recognising that the massive majority, or you can use the word culture, which is which is a camouflage, because again, the massive majority of people are none of the things that you are being encouraged to fear. That we are all being encouraged to fear, not just you.
You asked me what the solution was.
What about doctors? How much do we read into Harold Shipman?
Well, Harold Shipman was a one-off case, wasn't it? We're talking statistics.
Still a white middle-aged man. What about all the paedophiles in broadcasting, in showbiz? Should we all be suspicious of white men in showbiz?
If the statistics show that it's a high percentage of the radio presenters, TV presenters, well, I mean, this is not for me to say.
Yes, it is. It categorically is. How high?
Yeah, if radio presenters are statistically 3 or 4 times higher than every other profession,
but then we should go after all radio presenters. What, set fire to the studio?
No, absolutely not. Then? But I think we have to have a discussion about it, don't we?
We are, and I'm asking. That's exactly what we're doing. What then? So let's say radio presenters are 3 or 4 times more likely than the rest of the population to be paedophiles. What should we do to the ones that aren't?
Well, we'll bring it back to the subject about.
I'm going to ask that question again in a minute.
Yeah. Well,
what should we do to the ones that aren't?
My solution is this. My suggestion is this: it is about integration, as possibly Keir Starmer was trying to get out, quite poorly. But if the people who are coming in here within their cultures have a different view upon women, as is what is socially acceptable in this country,
different from the man who boasts about grabbing them by the vagina and gets defended by the politicians who are whipping up precisely the feelings that you're describing.
Well, I'm not talking about politicians in the USA. I'm talking about people in this country at the moment.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I'm talking about people in this country who defend that politician in the USA and defend his boasting about being sexually assaulting women.
Well, again, with all due respect, I'm not talking about those politicians either. I'm talking about the question you asked me.
Well, who's whipping up these feelings and this anger? Mostly.
Yeah. My proposal is that integration has to be considered rather than just lumping a bunch of men in a hotel together, within their own communities, to share their consistent culture that they've been brought up with all these years, and then let them disappear into society.
So, I mean, the problem is, and this brings us back to these 3 distinctions I drew at the top of the show between the online, the terminally online, the genuinely concerned mother or father or a citizen, and the white supremacist, the people who consider a crime, and you've come a little bit closer to this than I think you intended. A crime is worse according to the background or ethnicity of the offender. And you get all of those distinctions, and then if you just dip your toe into the online world, that one of the people they hate most is Sadiq Khan. the Mayor of London, and you can't get more integrated than being elected Mayor of the capital city 3 times on the trot.
I agree, and as I said, you know, there are going to be plenty of people who don't care about the things I'm saying that you're saying. They've already made their minds up; it'll never change. But we're trying to talk about the people that can actually consider what the problem is.
And I don't know how we identify them or reach them. And I think that point about integration and the mayor is probably a little more pertinent than you allow, but I'm already perilously late for the news. Thank you, Ray. And thanks for your honesty as well. It's important. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:37. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I think the biggest distinction of all here is probably one that we didn't make at the beginning. It's people who really do believe that some categories of people should all be judged according to their worst members. You remember Not All Men during the Me Too movement, and whenever there is a particularly hideous case of sexual abuse or rape, and there are quite a few people who take to social media to protest it's not all men. It's a reflexive not all men brigade. That seems to get switched off in these contexts, doesn't it? It seems to be they are all men. And my thanks to Emma for reminding me that the Donald Trump Sun story that I did indeed misremember involved Skittles and Syrian refugees. And his argument was, if I had a bowl of Skittles and I told you that just 3 would kill you, would you take a handful? That's our Syrian refugee problem. And I'm getting a lot of that today, including from people who I don't think would have been in this space 10 years ago. Which is, well, it doesn't matter, does it? Because if some of them are dodgy, some of them are potentially dodgy, then we should get rid of or lock our doors to all of them. And there is no other category of community about whom we would say that in this country, except, I hesitate to say this, except definitely refugees and asylum seekers, and possibly now we're heading towards immigrants in general. You know, we've got cases coming out of our ears of people doing terrible things or people being accused of terrible things, and absolutely nobody extrapolating from that conclusions about people who have not and will never do anything wrong. I don't know how you do this. I mean, I've just noted, actually, talking to Ray, and we'll talk to Laurie in a moment, I've noted that I'm wary of this whole conversation because I don't like what it reveals. I think we both know the needle of what people think is publicly acceptable when it comes to comments about race or immigration has moved so far. The idea that everything was going to be calmed down and sorted out by Brexit is tragically laughable. It's moved so far now, people saying things in all sorts of areas of public discourse that they would never have said out loud 10 years ago. I've said it before, I'll say it again. That's what political correctness and wokeness achieved, is it just created courtesy, decency, and a resistance to the idea that if you, as a 53-year-old white man from Kidderminster, commit a hideous crime, then I, as a completely different 53-year-old white man from Kidderminster, should be punished for it. That's the point Donald Trump's son was trying to drive home. And we probably should have paid a little bit more attention to how seductive it is. Why should we take any of these people if 3 of them are potential problems? And I guess as an island nation, we're more susceptible to that because we probably have an inbuilt idea of, I mean, literally, it comes from the same Latin word, doesn't it, of insularity or insulation. That you can somehow seal the borders, cut ourselves off, deal with the threats that are homegrown and keep out all the ones that are not homegrown. But you'd never, ever, ever find a homegrown threat, I don't think. It didn't even happen with the Catholic Church, when abuse was found to be endemic on both sides of the Irish Sea. Happened in my own monastic public school. And nobody, as far as I'm aware, has gone after entirely innocent Catholic priests on a regular basis or started setting fire to churches and cathedrals as a consequence of crimes committed by members of that community, of that order, of that. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But I think we can all see the direction that the traffic is going in. The only difference between us is some of us think it's awful and some of us think it's, well, at worst, wonderful and at least acceptable or inevitable. Laurie is in Finsbury Park. Laurie, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'm also a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you. Welcome.
Firstly, I want to say, with the greatest possible respect, it's 10:42, and we've had 42 minutes of listening to men talk to each other.
Only two men. It's my fault. That it's not a selection. It's just I interrupt too much, and I talk too much. So I'll shut up for a while and let you fill as much time as you want.
Hashtag not all men. Not all men.
Okay. Yes.
But look, what you say is completely right about the condemning an entire category of people on the basis that one of them might one day commit a crime is the essence of prejudice, is literally the definition of prejudice. It's prejudging an entire group of people. But secondly, this is a trend that we've seen in this country and across certainly the English-speaking world for a long, long time. I mean, hundreds of years, certainly decades of using fear of violence against women and girls and children to excuse demonization of outsider groups. And, the great civil rights activist and writer Angela Davis calls this the myth of the outsider rapist. She was talking then about the excuse of how many black men in the American South were being murdered by mobs of white racists who convinced themselves that they were simply protecting their women. This was used as the excuse for lynchings. And in the British occupation of India, we justified massacres by saying we were just retribution for rape, real or imagined attacks on white women. And the argument that black and brown men pose a unique threat to women and to white women and children is not new at all. It's a very, very old form of prejudice. And another group we see being targeted by exactly this kind of lie is transgender people, and particularly transgender women right now. I mean, you had this discussion on the show, quite recently, saying is this a unique threat to women and girls? Are transgender women some kind of unique threat to women? Of course they're not. But somehow we can only speak about this kind of violence when we project it onto outsiders.
Is it? I mean, I don't know if generous is quite the right word, but is it because it somehow feels so trying to deal with all male sex abusers feels like an unclimbable mountain. But if you break it down, so I'm not coming from a place of sympathy, but a place of seeking to understand people that I find hard to understand. I present it to you as fixable. We can deal with these M&Ms or these Skittles. There's no way we can deal with all the sweets in all the world. But hey, look, there's some Skittles here that we can excise from our diet. Let's just do that. And it becomes a bit easier to understand, perhaps.
Absolutely, and look, there are quite a few women in some of these racist and homophobic, transphobic movements who have found, one way in which they're finally allowed to speak about real violence that they've seen and suffered in their lives, about because violence against women and children is a real thing, and yet somehow, finally, by some miracle, everybody who dismissed it for years and years and years suddenly seems to care about it when we're blaming it on outsiders. And yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't seem like it seems like it's so baked in you can't. Yeah.
It will always be there, and I mean, people will produce statistics, sometimes questionable, that prove they're right to be more worried about these people than other people, and they will talk about culture, and they will talk about how women are viewed in other parts of the world, and there will be some truth in some of these points. But will it ever be? Why will it never be enough to justify treating everybody from that quotes culture end quotes with suspicion?
Well,
because we believe in innocence until proven guilty, I suppose.
I'm not sure it's that.
Go on.
Unfortunately, I think that's a quite generous and optimistic. But one of the things, I mean, if you look at history, the crime of rape was first understood not as a crime against a person, but as a crime of property. The crime was done by the other man against the man who technically owned that woman. It's about, the word is chauvinism. It's an out-of-fashion word. But you see people talking about our women. Those people aren't allowed to attack women, our women. Only we are. It's about territory, about property.
Blimey.
Who is allowed to? Honestly, this is the attitude I've seen. I've been doing activism in this kind of area for a very long time.
And that would explain why. I don't know if anyone ever dug into how disproportionate it was, but there were certainly many cases of people in the EDL being found guilty of precisely the sort of crimes that they claimed to resist when they were committed by people of different backgrounds. I mean, That's horrible. I wish I could push back, but I don't have the knowledge or experience to push back, and you do, as you say. The idea that no, these crimes are fine when they're committed by one of us. Hey, look, if it's a powerful, rich white man boasting about grabbing women by the vagina, then that's just locker room talk, even though, we've got no reason to believe he was lying. But if it's somebody who's just come over here on a small boat doing it, then let's just set fire to his home and stuff all the people in it. It certainly fits the facts as they are available, but it's very, very bleak. Fascinating call, Laurie. I hope you ring me again. Thank you. It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
50 is the time. Extraordinary response for that last caller. By God, James, this caller is amazing. This caller is talking a lot of sense. Current caller is exactly why I love your show, James. Writes Phil, it's so eye-opening. This woman says Miriam has just wrapped up your entire hour with 15 minutes to spare. Well, let's hope not, Miriam. I've got to invoice for the whole thing. Laurie brought a discerning historical concept to an age-old problem, James. Men, writes John in Edinburgh, and the psychology of in-group and out-group dynamics, writes Yvonne, as explained by the psychologist Henri Tajfel. Jem makes another point, a slightly simpler point, but that's helpful too. It doesn't matter about race or religion. If you house a large number of young men together with nothing to do and no money, there will be trouble. Who's going to argue with that? If you house a large number of young men together with no money and nothing to do, there will be trouble. Of course, there are various lies out there that it would even address these points. They've got loads of money. Loads. I saw one with a phone once. Loads of money. But that's the point. And that, I think, speaks perfectly to the distinction between this mother with the loudhailer essentially begging the rioters, the race rioters, to stop rioting, and them, and the white supremacists who turn up at these events to attack the police and often try to set fire to the buildings containing the people in which no one often has been accused of anything. That idea there. And the other point Laurie made, and I know I said I almost have to steel myself now when we wade into this because of what has happened to our country since people started making various claims about Romanians and Polish people and EU citizens, and the idea that it was going to get better after after a plurality voted to get rid of all of them was always, shall we say, unlikely. But Lottie picks up on this point raised about it being okay for, quotes, our men to assault, quotes, our women, but not for people of other heritage. She says that's absolutely bang on and was perfectly phrased by your caller. And I've got more mail calls, which Laurie, I think, had a justifiable problem with, but I can only speak to the people that ring me. And it is a medium in which men are all... now the men that have rung me are going to feel like I'm not grateful for their time and attention this morning. So anyway, I've made the point. Michael's in Leeds. Michael, what would you like to say?
Okay, I feel grateful, even though I am a man. I'm a black man, so I don't know if that hedges it slightly.
Okay.
Yeah, so your other caller was talking to a whole list of lynchings that happened in America and I guess other places. And the most celebrated of it was Emmett Till. Emmett Till, yes. A 14-year-old kid that said goodbye to a lady that sold him bubblegum over his shoulder, and the husband then went out and lynched him, basically.
He was 14 as well, appropriately enough.
14 years old, yes. And I think this speaks to, basically, this is really a tool that the far right are using to highlight what's happening. So there's two things happening. There's this perception that the minority of immigrants that are coming illegally by boats are the problem, even though we know that the illegal visa given immigration is the majority, but
the massive majority.
Yeah, it's the massive. Yeah,
but no one in politics can turn around and say we have to do this, otherwise the economy will collapse.
Exactly, and what I'd like to do is flip it. So we've been talking about immigrants and they're being sort of highlighted and sort of feathered and whatever, put a target put on them. But what about the stuff we watch, the stuff that,
Well, let me pause you because I don't want to run out of time. What about the fact that a teenage girl has alleged that a man assaulted her, tried to kiss her outside this hotel in Epping, and charges have been brought. So we can't talk about that case specifically, but we can talk about how you would feel if your 14-year-old daughter reported that to you. I hope, like me, you think you'd feel the same regardless of where it happened or what the background of the person who allegedly did it was. But if we tie that to the other message about men shacked up together with nothing to do and no money, and that is a recipe for disaster, then some elements of a protest against some of these facilities becomes a little more understandable and perhaps even a little more inevitable than you allow.
But the first thing I would do, and I do have a daughter who's not far off that age, the first thing I would do wouldn't be what's the race of this person. I used to work for the police, and we used to use IC codes for racial profile. We only did that because, part of actually solving a crime is knowing the description of the person. It's not that we're implying there's any extra criminality on people. And what I was going to try and say was, I watch programs like Dexter and You Netflix, where white and predominantly white, I'm yet to see a show showing a black or brown person killing people as a murderer, and people going online going, that was a great show.
With impunity. Well, Dexter is a serial killer that kills serial killers, isn't he?
Yeah, but Goldberg isn't.
I don't know.
He kills anyone that doesn't want to go out with him or seems to be cheating or is not a good boyfriend to the person he fancies. I mean, basically, that's rationalization. And I was going to say that the archetype is what we're battling with. There's an archetype that, that happened with the Liverpool guy that got in a car. And
careful, that's another live case. That's another live case. I have to. I mean, I'm not being unduly cautious. You wouldn't believe the people who are comfortable flirting with contempt of court in this country at the moment, but I'm not one of them, so we can't go there. But what you can say is that when hideous crimes are undertaken by people of my ethnicity, but not yours, nobody puts me on the hook for it. And that is that is going to be, I think, the hardest nut to crack in this entire conversation, because I can divide my audience, and that's quite scary, considering that this is one of the few bastions of liberalism in the British media. I can divide my audience who think it's reasonable to tar everybody with the same brush, and those of us, everybody of a certain category, with the same brush, but goodness me, not any other categories except this one. The refugee, the Muslim perhaps, or the migrant, wouldn't do it with any other category at all. And then people like you and me, Michael, who think that is a passport to absolute terror, a passport to the worst periods of history. And I imagine that during the worst periods of history, this dichotomy appeared as well on the route to the real horrors. The population began to divide along the lines of people who think it's perfectly acceptable to hideously demonise one section of society, one almost wholly innocent section of society, and the people who thought it was terrifying. And here we are. Peter is in Gillingham with the last word probably on this. Peter, what would you like to say?
What we need to do, James, is we need to have a mass conversation on what sort of better Britain looks like. We're having it already. I was called by Sadiq Al-Hassan, the MP for North Somerset, to give a keynote on Brexit, racism, all the other stuff the other week. He took a risk. He's a conviction politician. He had a town hall meeting, and he started the process of having this conversation because it's a bottom-up strategy, not a top-down one. If we want to deal with the idiots you talked about, that's media conversation. But he's actually having that. And he told me that there's 5 other MPs doing this. So it's what I call mass Brexorcism, James.
Oh, here we go. But I'm the last person on earth to criticise anybody, and I know you do it in fun, and it's both a powerful tool and a quite uplifting one on occasion. But you do see, I don't know if I can argue against the idea that that Brexit unleashed something that we cannot get back in the bottle.
No, it accelerated it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But actually, one part of that national conversation would be to kill some of the disinformation and misinformation.
I don't know who turns up for that. I mean, no offence to you. If you were speaking, I'm sure they were queuing around the block. But who turns up for them?
Well, who turned up to the North Somerset one? There was one person from Reform who was disgusted that that Nigel Farage wasn't there to present the side. No one came to present the glorious benefits. So they keep saying if we have this conversation, it'll upset the others. They don't show up.
And they don't want to have the conversation anymore. But I don't know. I mean, I mean, part of me doesn't want to have this conversation, or didn't at 10 o'clock today. But the problem is, if everybody else is, and allowing sort of some of the worst kind of language and some of the worst kind of tropes to become increasingly normalised, then I suppose the worst thing we can do is just sort of sigh in frustration at how futile it sometimes feels to stand up to these sort of movements and these sort of ideas, and take some inspiration, I think, from everything that I know of her, which isn't much and is based entirely on one article in the Times, from this woman Louise Wand, who was there to protest against loads of men being stuck all day with nothing to do together and no money to do it with, to protest against the thugs who attack police and set police cars alight.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. How old are you? Really? You look much younger. Oh gosh, what's your secret? Not you. And at what point do you start thinking, is it my age, or is it I mean, did I have a heavy night last night? No. I just feel things beginning to sort of slip through my mind. Do you know what I mean? What age does that start normally? And obviously there are going to be some very poignant exceptions, including things like early onset dementia. I'm not currently addressing that. I'm addressing the idea that we all, and of course there'll be plenty of younger people listening to this who haven't got the first idea what I'm talking about, but generally speaking, we all acknowledge a certain slowing, don't we, of the little grey cells, a certain slowing of the cogs. Do you acknowledge that? Has that happened to you yet? I don't know if I should tell you this because it'll probably come back to haunt me, but I've been very conscious of this lately. I don't know if you notice. I hope you don't. I love all the people who took me literally when I said, how old are you? And just texted me their age. Thank you for that. I'm not sure I can read them all out. It would probably sound like we're doing bingo on the radio. But maybe I should. I don't know whether you've noticed it. I nearly did it then. But sometimes, and it's partly because I do this, jumping around the place so much and starting off talking about one thing and then talking about another, and not like Donald Trump doing the weave, as Keith insists, but as something a lot more sensible and comprehensible than that. But I do sometimes find myself getting to the end of a section of my monologues. I don't like, it's a pompous word, that, my introduction, call it what you will. I get getting to the end of my blatherings at the top of each hour, getting to the end of a section of one of my blatherings. Soliloquies is a nice one of my soliloquies, and forgetting where it started. And I think I can cover it up. I don't know if you notice, because we're talking like once a month, maybe not even that often, but when I genuinely find myself just beginning to spool out a few words in the hope of the idea that I was talking about reigniting in the back of my brain. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of space to remember what it was that I was talking about and was certain was a brilliant idea, but it's just because I got distracted by something. It's just currently eluding me and I can't remember what it was. Graham, I'm not inviting suggestions on what we should call the introductions at the top of the hour. My own producer has just written, "You're not Yargo," on the screen in front of me, and Graham has suggested main chunk of waffle. I don't know whether you're describing part of your breakfast this morning, Graham, or whether you're trying to be rude to me. And the other thing I do, I can't, 53 is a funny age. The other thing I do is I can't find exactly the right word that I want sometimes. Again, I don't know if you notice that. I'm quite good at finding the right word most of the time. But every now and then I sense it's a perfect word. And when it comes to getting the right words, I do want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I want to get the perfect. When you get the perfect word, it's such a satisfying feeling, isn't it? Sometimes the perfect word is not a particularly obscure word or a particularly, erudite word. The perfect word might be, bang or something. But sometimes you're just searching for the right word. You talk about diversity and you're looking not for the word, you're looking for something different. Is it plurality? What is the perfect word? And when I started doing this job 20-something years ago, Les has been in touch. So I'm 60, James, but I've forgotten the question. Les, you should not be surprised to learn during my main chunk of waffle that I haven't got around to asking it yet. Oh, yes, I have. Yeah, that was how old you are. And I mean, 20 years ago, and now I've got more people telling me that I'm describing ADHD, which is becoming a bit of a recurring theme on the programme. But 20 years ago, this didn't happen. 20 years ago, I never felt, what's the right word? In fact, I used to have I do a little lap of honour in my own brain about getting the right word right on time. Why am I talking about this? Demonstrably, says Dave. That's a great word, isn't it? Why am I talking about this? That's not me asking myself because I've forgotten. That's me testing you on whether or not you've been paying attention to the news today. The COVID-19 pandemic was detrimental to brain health, even for those who never contracted the virus, a study has suggested. Academics have established that the strain of the pandemic on people's lives may have aged our brains prematurely. May is doing a lot of lifting here, all right? The ageing process was more pronounced among men, older people, and those from deprived backgrounds. I have to be careful. A few people pointed out this morning that e-bikes are in danger of becoming the new parking tickets. And, of course, the other hardy perennial of phone-ins that can invite millions of people to ring in but never or very, very rarely produce an interesting response would be, is there anybody old out there feeling poorly? And this subject matter runs perilously close to that particular pratfall, doesn't it? There you go, that particular pratfall. That was a felicitous turn of phrase. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So I do not know whether or not the things I've just described to you are a consequence of what happened during COVID. And I do not think it would be that helpful for me to say, are you a bit slower on the uptake than you used to be? Are you a bit slower on the uptake than you used to be? Roddy can go to the top of the class today. He's paying attention. Occasionally, you reach for a word, James, that is eluding you. I have noticed this, but it's understandable. You found the word traction the other day. I could actually hear you searching for it, because we do so at the same moment, James, when you say, I need the word. And Roddy says, that's empathy. That's nice to know. But I suppose, Roddy, some people will get there before you and me, which, when you're presenting the programme, could potentially become a bit of a problem somewhere down the line. Professor Dorothy Auer, Professor of Neuroimaging and senior author on this study, says, this study reminds us that brain health is shaped not only by illness, but by our everyday environment. The pandemic put a strain on people's lives, especially those already facing disadvantage. We can't test yet whether the changes we saw will reverse, but it's certainly possible, and that's an encouraging thought. How many people... Oh, well, no, let's not do it like that. Let's do it like we do everything on this programme. Have you just felt a light bulb switch on above your head? Have you just gone... So what dates would we put on this? When did it start? And when did you start getting frightened, for example, about not knowing what was going to happen? Because these are the kind of things that can age your brain. You can see why socioeconomic status or deprivation is linked to it. Because if you were locked down in very comfortable surroundings and circumstances, it was not necessarily a walk in the park, which you could only do in very specific and limited ways as well, of course. But it was probably a much easier experience than it would have been if you were cooped up with people that you didn't particularly like, or people that you didn't know, or that you had nothing to do and no money to spend. And we're back to the asylum hotels, aren't we? So that the toll that might take upon someone, not being attributable previously to anything specific. You'd think, am I getting a little bit older? Am I tired? Am I this? Am I that? When you look back now and you read that the COVID experience, so many different elements of the COVID experience, not least boredom and fear, could actually have slowed you down, could have aged your brain. Are you feeling a little light bulb come on and above your head? Good Lord, I think that's me. How do you want to do this? I'd like you to tell me what you think did age your brain, what elements of the COVID experience did actually slow you down, what toll it took on you. But I'd also like you to tell me, and this is where I'm going to have to be careful, I'd also like you to tell me what you would point at now as proof of this particular pudding. So I'm giving you two things which could be a consequence of my not particularly advanced, but nonetheless advancing years, in that I sometimes lose my thread when I'm talking to you. This isn't normal, by the way. Talking 3 hours a day, including lengthy, what did Graham call it again? Main chunks of waffle at the top of almost every hour is not normal. I don't know whether or not anybody could do that without losing their thread occasionally, but I used to lose my thread less. And struggling to find the right word genuinely made me wonder this morning when I read this story whether I had slowed down cognitively as a consequence of, not necessarily the virus, because they tested people who were never infected, who never actually caught COVID, and found that they'd slowed down as well. So what would you, I mean, do you buy it? There you go. That's the question. Do you buy this? Because I think I do. But the minute I buy it, I'm thinking, well, how do I know it's not this, that, or the other? And so you can answer both of those questions. Do you buy this idea? If so, why? 0345 6060 973. And the second question then becomes, how do you know? What makes you think it is that period, that weird, hopefully unique period of existence that has slowed you down a bit? What makes you think it was that, as opposed to all of the other things that it could be? 0345 6060 973. And when you look back on that period, what do you think? And this is actually a question we should have asked before. I can't believe we haven't. At which point you're probably going to text me and say, actually, James, just to prove the point of this hour, you have asked this question before. What was the hardest thing to deal with in terms of mental strain? I wonder if we're all going to have different answers to that question. What was when you look back, the thing that really knocked the stuffing out of you, particularly during lockdown, but during the whole of COVID in general, what was it? What was the thing that makes you think, do you know what, it probably did take a toll on me, because if it hadn't been for the COVID, I never would have been in that situation? So there's a bunch of questions for you there. Is this happening to you? If it is, how do you know it's because of COVID? And when you look back on COVID, what do you think the things are? What were the things that really, I like the phrase knock the stuffing out of you, because it seems to speak to this research in rather more is demotic the right word, Keith? In rather more demotic language. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 is the time. This is what I'm talking about, Paul. I don't know if COVID aged my brain or if I just grew up, because I'm now 28 and I'm getting brain fog quite regularly. I disassociate and I can't remember what I was doing before. I mean, it's possible, I'm not obviously qualified, but it's possible you are part of this story. Another element of it that I hadn't come across before, this is previous research, showing that those who had COVID scored about 3 IQ points lower than those who had not been infected, and those who'd been in intensive care scored 9 points lower. Those who suffer from long COVID scored about 6 points lower than people who hadn't been infected at all. How are we going to work out whether or not this is, like in Paul's case, 28 years old and getting, quite a few of you are pointing out that the menopause may have similar effects as well, which of course I should have probably clocked a little bit earlier. How are we going to know whether or not this was a consequence of COVID, or whether or not it is just a consequence of life? I don't know, but I want you to tell me. Will's in Camberwell. Will, what do you think?
Hi, James. I'm strongly sceptical at the moment of the COVID thing you're talking about.
Go on.
And the reason for that is because I've had a long course to be thinking about this area. So I was diagnosed with MS about almost 20 years ago.
Yes.
And to be fair, I'm living a very good thing with that. You know,
Sure.
If you met me, you wouldn't tell a single thing.
Okay.
But one thing I do have is it can affect cognition and stuff like that.
Yes.
And so I've been paying attention, shall we say. And 25 years ago, I completed an undergraduate degree in computer science and stuff. And then the middle of last year, I haven't used it since, by the way, really.
Sure.
Middle of last year, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a little boot camp just to move back into it and improve my knowledge. And I'm sitting there, and the teacher's literally talking about stuff that I've learned 20 years later, I've got a degree and all that, and everyone says, oh, you'll know this. But as she's explaining it, I can literally think it's just not quite syncing properly, you know? And there's these 20-year-olds, it's just going straight in, and then, oh, look at this, PHP and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, oh, God, why?
Forgive me for not knowing this, but if multiple sclerosis is likely to contribute to that, then you are a sort of exception to any general rules, aren't you? Obviously, if that's going to bring a cognitive decline, then I don't know how you'd fit in, for example, to research like this.
There is a risk of that outlying anything like that. But the thing that I found when I first read it years ago was that the brain shrinks anyway by 1% or something a year anyway.
Yes.
So the actual mass of it decreases.
From what age?
I think it's for life, or certainly from, say, 20s.
There's no way my brain was bigger when I was a baby than it was when I was 19. I had a tiny little head when I was a baby. By the time I was in my teens, it was absolutely enormous. I looked like the Mekong out of Dan Dare. But my eyes were the same size. Did you know that?
I have heard, I was chatting to a girlfriend about that only the other day, that the big eyes and babies say the same. But there is something about, I didn't realise that when you go to uni at those 18 to 23, 24, 25, that is kind of the peak time to be cramming all the stuff in. And that if you do it later, 20 years later, great, good luck to you do it. But at the same time, it doesn't go in and stick as naturally. But also, one quick point, if I may, even though the volume is shrinking, you can still make new connections. So now, for example, I practice language every evening on my mobile phone, and I learned dancing in my mid-30s just to keep everything going. We talked about that, swing dancing, do you remember?
Of course.
But yeah, it's got to keep pushing back.
How would we know? How would we know? How would a researcher be able to say, this is why the research is couched in maze? And what leans towards this being the reason is that it is measurably different from what it was like when we hadn't just lived through something like the pandemic. 5.5 month higher deviation of brain gap, to use the technical term, compared with people who were only assessed before the pandemic. So you've had 5.5 more months of aging than you would have had if the pandemic hadn't happened. How on earth would we know, particularly for someone with MS, how on earth would we know that this was a consequence of what we went through?
Well, top line, I don't know the methodology of how precisely, but 5.5 months or whatever you just said, in the span of a human lifetime, is a small fraction, really,
but in the span of 3 or 4 years, it's not.
No, but it's on average as well, presumably, isn't it?
No, it's that period there that has sped things up by 5.5 months. So you're 5.5 months older than you would have been now at the beginning of the pandemic, plus the years that actually passed.
Well, my commute used to be 3 hours a day. I'm working from home. I got all that back.
Fair enough. There are calculations to be done. Thank you, Will. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. I think we may have stumbled into one of those topics that is unanswerable. How do you know? I mean, lots of examples like this from Stephen. I finished work for the day last month. I couldn't find my car in the staff car park at the hospital where I work. I spent ages searching for it before it dawned on me that I'd used the train that day as I was going to the staff night out, which we had talked about all day. I mean, we've all had experiences a little bit like that, perhaps not quite like that. How on earth would you know? Which is why I'll nudge you next towards the second part of the question. Not Will, you. Which is, when you look back, we've moved on very quickly from the mental toll, haven't we? We've moved on very quickly from stuff that would once be an anxiety dream and suddenly became our shared daily reality. What was it when you look back that thinking about it now was so debilitating and so discombobulating that you think it probably did age you more than you would have aged if the pandemic had never happened? What was it? Could be homeschooling the kids. We found that quite straightforward, but other people found it absolutely unbearable. What about fear? Talk to me about genuine fear, not knowing what was going to happen. I listen, my politics are pretty clear, but I do wonder whether, realising every day that the fate of the nation was in the hands of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, and this isn't to be glib, this is to speak directly to the research that we're discussing, being reminded every day that the fate of the nation and quite possibly our family was in the hands of Boris Johnson, a man who can't lie straight in bed. If I said to you that will have taken a much deeper toll upon your mental well-being, would you really be that surprised? 11:24 is the time. Vicky is in Gloucester. Vicky, what would you like to say?
Hi, Hi, James.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'm fangirling a bit now because I've not spoken to you before.
Oh, welcome aboard. Better late than never, Vicky.
Yeah, so I've rung up before, but just not you. I've been a bit scared.
Yeah, well, it's the big time now. It's the big time now, Vicky. Don't blow it. What would you like to say?
Well, it's just on your producer. The brain fog issue and the slowing down, it could well be something to do with COVID. Basically, my history is I got flu, so very similar virus to COVID, in 2014, and I was left with ME.
Okay.
Which is obviously, if listeners don't know, one of the huge symptoms of that is brain fog, and fatigue, which obviously slows you down. And as a bit of a back history, I suffered quite severe trauma as a child. I got my care records and found that I'd had a IQ test, which obviously doesn't generally change throughout your life. I think my score was about 150, so eligible for Mensa. And I was interested in me because I'd always sort of flattered around in life, and I decided to go for an official test again.
Right.
And I found my score. I was about 20 points below in the one test and about 25 in the other test below what I would have been.
Good Lord.
And I felt that I was...
Did you cheat?
I really struggled.
Did you cheat the first time round, Vicky?
Well, I was tested differently because I was tested as a child, so they do that differently. But the very much thing is that the two aspects of an IQ test. You've got the culture fair test, which is all the symbols and signs and things, i.e., if anybody that doesn't speak English or can't speak English or can't read can actually do. And then they do the one that's more sort of verbal reasoning and things like that to do. And it was that one that was done second, and that was the one I got my highest on. And I felt that had I been able to do that test first,
you might have done better.
Been able to do better.
What about the stuff we went? Because I'm getting quite a lot of messages that make me wonder whether we've suppressed our memories of lockdown as a sort of survival mechanism. Homeschooling my eldest, who was 6, caring for my newborn while my husband was working in a residential home. I was forever scared he was going to bring the virus home to the baby, writes Sam in Sussex. It seems to me pretty plausible that we lived through, and I know you had trauma in your childhood, but we lived through trauma during COVID in a country, in a society where it's often not acknowledged and often even perceived as weakness or denied. I wonder if we're still doing that. We're still not actually properly articulating how bloody hard it was for so many people to go through that, whether they were ill or not.
I think it was because I actually found lockdown okay because of my ME. My world has massively decreased. I'm not able to work anymore. I don't have the social life I had before. I don't, I used to do a lot of theatre and acting, and I don't do that anymore. And so my world was small anyway, but I think during COVID, everybody's world shrunk.
Yeah, and you'd be a pioneer. Well, I want a better word than pioneer or early adopter, but it just meant that other people were experiencing small doses of what you have lived with now for much of your life. Vicky, thank you. I'm sorry to hear what you're going through. I read an extraordinary piece about ME yesterday by Sean O'Neill in the Times. I don't know if you saw it. His daughter suffered from it for years before she died, and it really does focus on how appallingly let down you've been by many aspects of both the media and society in general. But I think hopefully things seem to be getting better. This is nice. Please don't use my name, although I read it to the end and you wrote your name in bloody great letters, which you didn't have to do anyway. But hey, well done. You got it at the top. Hi, James. My friends and I are all in our 40s and have all faced this brain fog creeping in. We have way too many conversations about whether this is due to COVID or perimenopause or our phones melting our brains or just generally getting older. In my case, I've also been diagnosed recently with MS, so that's added to my list of options. We know there will be no way to ever know. Well, that is problematic in the context of the conversation that we're having. But what is something that you will know is what it is that you think Amit picks up on the Boris Johnson question. Elaine explains it was never knowing. It was never knowing if it was ever going to end. And Mark manages to find some humour in this and say Trump can manage it with ease, James, but I suspect that's because you have to have a trail of thought in the first place in order to be able to lose it. I don't know whether Scott is expressing his own troubles and travails here or remembering mine when he writes, listening to your show dip in and out when you were broadcasting from your shed was pretty stressful. For who? Oh, well, you were listening, weren't you? It was pretty stressful for me, sitting there thinking and saying, as Scott reminds me, can you hear me? Hello? Can anybody hear me? And having no way of knowing. At least here I can see some vacant faces staring back at me through the glass. But then I was just literally staring at the walls of my shed. 11:30 is the time. So 2 ways into this. First is, what do you reckon? Is this like a light bulb moment for you? Say, flipping it, James. I think I am part of this particular problem. I have categorically slowed down since the lockdown, since COVID. And the second bit of the question is, what took the biggest toll on you during that period? What really, looking back, knocked the stuffing out of you? Because I think we were all in a very British way, weren't we? And again, I'd probably lay some of the responsibility for this at the feet of Boris Johnson. We were supposed to buckle up, come on, pull your socks up, stiff upper lip, everybody get on with it, keep calm and carry on. And that is not always a recipe for good health, whether mental or, as this research might suggest, physical. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, this is tricky, right? I'll be with Susan and John imminently, but the problem with this research, and the reason why it's couched in language like may have aged our brains prematurely, is that we can't pin it down. Half an hour in, there is one way you can do this. The number of people in their 20s and 30s telling me that they recognise what we're describing is quite surprising. Because, again, that's why I began this hour by asking how old you are, although I just expected you to say it in your own head. I didn't expect you to text me in your hundreds with various different numbers. I don't think I felt like that in my 20s or my 30s. Did you? If you're sort of older than that, did you ever find... You didn't ever notice yourself struggling to find the right word or losing your thread or suffering from what has become known as brain fog? That idea that something has slowed down. Something has, possibly if this research is to be believed, something has aged. So how do we know what has caused it? And the answer might be that if you're in your 20s or your 30s, it didn't used to be like that. The closer you get to my age, and particularly if you're a woman dealing with menopausal issues, the harder it is to separate one reason or one explanation from another. But for younger people, if it is not something that older people experienced or recognised, then we become closer to it. And that, I think, would add to the collective trauma. I like this message from Deborah. I think it links to the increase in anxiety and mental health, James. Collective trauma was experienced, I'm sure, as well as personal traumas. It could be a form of PTSD. For young people in particular, the idea that life can change in an instant and not be attributable to an accident or a tragedy, but something altogether different. I honestly think that historical lesson may never be properly learned or articulated because it was so extraordinary and so unprecedented. But on a personal level, you tell me. 11:35 is the time. Susan's in Croydon. Susan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just wanted to touch on what you were talking about with, I think, a caller, two callers ago regarding brain size and that. I was a double major in economics and psychology decades ago, and there's one lecture, I don't remember much, but there's one that I really remember on physiological psychology, where we were basically taught, and I don't know if things have moved on since then, because this is in the 90s, but basically you're born with all the brain matter, really, that you're going to get. But what happens is your brain then creates these synaptic connections, as it's exposed to different stimuli, which is why children learn so much, and it's important to expose them to a variety of different things. And it happens really, really exponentially fast when you're young. And then it's still, as you get older, you still make new connections, but not quite as fast. And then I remember the lecturer saying that, and in the 20s, she's like, I hate to break it to you folks, but from your 20s, it sort of it starts slowing down, quite a bit, and you actually start losing some connections, and it really starts, when you're in your 40s, it gets even worse. And Alzheimer's essentially is a real dramatic acceleration of these synaptic connections.
And so the idea that
you lose what you had,
that can be accelerated by other external stimuli seems perfectly feasible.
So COVID could have influenced that. I could see that, if there's a mechanism where it affects that, synaptic connection creation and formation and destruction, I could see how it would do it. And then just the other question you asked is, if you're of a certain age, in your 20s, I don't remember in my 20s experiencing brain fog at all.
No, same.
I am experiencing it now, but then to your point, I'm the same age as you. I'm attributing it to the menopause because I've got other things that are going on, and I just think I think it's just something related to that. I also didn't have COVID until like last year.
Oh, really?
But I don't know that's the first time.
But that's two things, isn't it? There's the viral impact, but this research is arguably even more interesting when it comes to the behavioural impact. So you wouldn't have to have it. Even the non-infected, the researchers have found, aged faster during COVID, and that's where I think we come back to perhaps questions of trauma, whether collective or individual. Getting hit emotionally in the brain, essentially, and we're describing bruises, just to be incredibly untechnical and unacademic for a moment, in direct contrast to you, Susan.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's something to that, because the brain is a fine-tuned instrument, and you can. That's why it's so important to take care of your mental health and that sort of thing. And things will traumatize you. You can have like little mini traumas, and they can all build up and affect people. That's the other thing I remember learning from my psych class.
Well,
you don't have to have a huge trauma. Even tiny traumas can add up.
Yeah, interesting that you mention a psych class, because I, as you were literally saying that, I wondered whether we realise it or not, a nation in dire need of some form of collective therapy to work through. And when you think of all the conversations we have on the programme about why is this happening now to young people, why is there so much of this out there, why do these people feel this way, and why can't they do that and the other, because we could do 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whether in fact we need a massive national talking cure on what we went through during those extraordinary years.
And it's probably going to be worse for the teens and the children that went through it, because that's the key developmental time. That's when all those synaptic, the massive formation there is happening. And if those have been blunted or
during really formative years, really formative years, probably more so for the sort of the kids that were moving from primary school to secondary school at the outset than for the children. There were children stuck at home who suffered from the lack of socialisation. So these problems could be in front of us for years to come. Thank you, Susan. That was a lot more intelligent contribution than I've managed so far. But I'll tell you something else that's very interesting. This is from Deborah, recommending a book that we've talked about a few times on the programme, and indeed Lucy Easthope, who wrote it, a disaster response professional, has been a guest on Full Disclosure. She says in that book, When the Dust Settles, Deborah reminds us that it's about 4 years after a disaster that a community starts to realise the trauma that it's been through as we try to get back to normal. First of all, sorry for forgetting that or overlooking that, because it does rather suggest that these are issues and this is something that should be on our agenda together a little bit more than it is. How many of the things we talked about, do you think? Mental health, most obviously, particularly among young people. But also, when we talk about some of the socio-economic consequences of that, when we talk about the million young people who aren't in work, education or training, when we sit here utterly baffled by the existence of hundreds of thousands of young people who don't seem to be able to do what came quite naturally to us, how much more of a role should COVID or lockdown or the whole period have played in our contemplations and conversations than it actually did? That is a question for the ages, because what if it is the case that the reason why an awful lot of people are I'm doing it. Oh no, I just did it then. What's the word that I'm looking for? It's sort of stagnant. An awful lot of people are stuck. It's not the perfect word. They're good words, but I can't think of what the perfect word is. You will now, and you'll send it to me. There's so many people are kind of stuck because they need to talk through what those extraordinary experiences have done to them. Good Lord. I've got John next, but before that, this is... I don't know whether this counts as a classic of the genre, but it's certainly a bit different.
Woke Watch.
Anti-woke Texan sent to the front line. This is 2 Woke Watches in 2 days. Hopefully this signals a return to a regular slot on the programme for this feature. And this is a warning to people who buy into anti-woke nonsense, as opposed to mockery of people who buy into anti-woke nonsense, which is our more regular approach. A man from Texas who fled to Russia with his family to escape LGBT indoctrination in the United States has been sent to the front line in Ukraine after signing up to join President Putin's invading army, his wife has said. He recorded a video. He moved to a little town near Moscow with his 3 daughters, and that's why you must resist the urge to mock, because this is actually a horrible story. Signed up for the army to prove to his new compatriots how committed he was to the country, and thought that he'd just be working on the education side of things or non-combat roles, and has now found out that he is going to be sent to the front line and will be heading to a special military operation. This in an interview given, in a video recorded recently. There's a heartbreaking line in this about why they took the decision to move to Russia. He says, the final straw was when we found out my daughter Sophia learnt about lesbians from a girl in her class. The final straw was when we found out that my daughter Sophia learnt about lesbians from a girl in her class. She didn't fully understand it, but for us that was enough to realise something had to change. So they moved to Russia, and he's now being sent to the front line in Vladimir Putin's war against Ukraine. Just be careful what you sign up for, and always remember, even if you do identify as anti-woke, that if you ask enough questions, people will be able to explain most things to you in a way that doesn't involve you feeling that you have little choice left but to move to Russia and run the risk of being sent to the front line in Vladimir Putin's invading army.
Woke Watch.
Time is approaching 11:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I haven't quite nailed down the question that's jumped out of the conversations we've been having. The headline under discussion is brains of even non-infected aged faster during COVID, and the conversation has moved towards a sort of examination of the trauma that might have contributed to that process, and the question of whether or not it may actually help us understand a whole heap of subjects that pop up on the programme on a regular basis. And the difficulty, of course, of pinning down precisely how you'd prove that that was the cause. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48, and this is very important. At this time yesterday on the show, I read out a message from a listener called Chris, who said that his wife had been brought up in the Jewish faith and had attended what he described as a Shabbat school. He went on to make further claims about what he said she had been taught in that school. As with all the texts and messages that I read out on the programme, I did so in good faith, but the message has understandably upset a lot of people, and I regret taking those unsubstantiated claims at face value, and I'm genuinely sorry for that. And it is very important that I get that out there, and thank you for your attention. It is 11:49. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Back to the question of brains. Even non-infected brains aging faster during COVID than at any other point it would seem in measured human history, and how that news lands in your world. Let's go to Didcot. John is there. John, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for talking to me. I'm not a subject expert. I'm bringing a sort of an anecdotal.
Aren't we all, John? Aren't we all?
Really. I always tune in. My ears prick up when I hear about long COVID, because my fiance and I both got COVID in November 2020, before the vaccines came out, and neither of us have ever been so ill in our lives. And then sort of roundabout by Christmas, we were starting to go for little walks, feeling like we were recovering. And then January, we thought, oh yeah, longer walks. And then our health completely collapsed, both of us, somewhere between January and February 2021. It took me 3.5 years to recover. I was a completely different person. Cognitive collapse, physical collapse. My fiance actually still is very ill. And so when people talk about long COVID, I tune in. Yes. Because there's so many people who don't believe you. Well, they're just the snowflakes and the hypochondriacs all came out and they all got long COVID. It's real. It's really life-changing. And then you mention a study which I would describe as the social effects on cognition and the brain of a pandemic. And oddly, my heart sank when you said that, because I thought, oh no, there's another complex thing for people to not believe in. There's another complex thing which may or may not be verified in the future, but they can lump it all together with long COVID and just not believe in it. And weirdly, my heart sank when I realised there was something else for people to sort of mock you for. Can you imagine what I mean?
I can, yes, I can. I mean, I wish you didn't feel that way, obviously, but it just... Where does the scepticism come from, do you think? Is it that people just want to believe that you're swinging the lead because it makes them feel safer?
I don't know, because I've seen it in the eyes of people who I know and love me.
Yes.
They go slightly blank when Steffi and I describe what happened to us over the last few years. Right. They nod and they're very sympathetic, but their responses show that they don't quite get it. Well, just to do a little bit more sport every day, they say. Which is
go for a walk. I think you may have missed the show we did earlier this week. I think it was on Monday when we talked about the difference between people who need a little bit of loving encouragement to get the wheels turning, and people who just can't. And I spoke of a teenage boy who had long COVID as well, and whose parents bought a trampoline and stuck it in the garden because they thought that might tempt him into the garden and get him doing a little bit of it. And he said every time he saw it, the guilt and shame that he felt was indescribable, because it was a reminder that in his eyes he was letting them down by not getting better.
Because people want you to be who you were. They want you to be healthy. They want to encourage you.
Yes. So it comes from a place of love, right?
Well, yeah. What they've learned is correct for 98% of people, which is do a little bit more every day and you'll get fitter and fitter and fitter and you get better and better. And it's good advice for most people. But when you get... so I've got a lot more interested in MEs since we got COVID.
Yeah, well, and
sort of research.
Yeah, and fibromyalgia as well. These things that possibly are going to play a much bigger role in understanding a lot of the issues that we talk about regularly on the programme. I do wonder about that, and where the resistance comes from. Probably twofold. You've got the loving-based resistance that you describe. People want you to be better and want to convince themselves that it is quite an easy journey for you to get better. And then you've got the political resistance to it, that this is going to be hugely expensive. And there may not be much light at the end of the tunnel, and we are going to have to do more to look after people in this situation, which, of course, flies in the face directly of the narrative that all parties now seem to pursue. 11:53 is the time. Sean's in Launceston in Cornwall. Sean, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you very much for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
My points, two interesting points you raised. I'm going to perhaps focus on the second one, and please forgive me if I get a bit slow in talking. During COVID, I was stuck abroad for 14 months. I was abroad when COVID hit, and it took me 14 months to come back to Britain.
Oh, Lord.
It was horrible, James. It was. Every time, my history is, I wasn't in the military at the time, but I'm an ex-military person, and I was working in the Middle East during those COVID years on a job. And every time the corridors opened up with a glimmer of hope of coming back to the UK, the criteria changed, shall we say. You needed one vaccine or two vaccines or this certificate or that certificate, or you had to go to a third country. It was chaotic.
That sounds... I mean, we thought we were back being pushed around here. We were lurching from optimism to pessimism and back again, but you described it happening in limbo, not happening in your normal home.
That is a fantastic word, limbo. Thank you. It's a fantastic word. The uncertainty... being a military-minded person, 14 months of uncertainty really messed me up. And I think, looking broader, the broader picture, in some small part, the whole population had uncertainty to a level they never had before. And that can't be positive, James. It can only be negative.
And we'll never really know, will we? Even with the impossible prospect of a sort of nationwide talking cure being funded and promoted by government, we'll never be able to separate what would have happened anyway, what's a direct consequence of what you're describing, and what might be a combination of the two. You'll never know, will you?
I've now got a situation to go back to your first... Sorry to interrupt, I do apologise.
You're not interrupting, and stop apologising.
Going back to your first point about how the mental effect after COVID vanished, or after COVID...
Well, it hasn't vanished, but abated.
After COVID went off the boils, shall we say, a little bit... I got diagnosed with GAD, GAD, a generalised anxiety disorder.
Oh, gosh.
And it is... I'm living with it now, James, but it's a struggle to live with. And it can hit me at any time. This generalised anxiety, it's not like worrying about you being overdrawn or nothing.
Sure.
This anxiety will just hit at the most inopportune, unexpected moments. And it's a struggle. It really is. Sorry, I'm stuttering. When I go into
You're also apologising again, mate, and you really don't have to.
When I go into my kitchen or go into the lounge or go into any of the rooms at home, I'll go and tidy up or move a glass or tidy up. I'll leave that room, go somewhere else, perhaps, I don't know, put a record on it. I go back to that room I've just tidied and I'll tidy it again. It repeats itself. And it's tidy. There's nothing to tidy, but I'll move something. I'll just fixate.
And you weren't like this before COVID?
Oh, no. And it's almost like I'm looking for control, maybe. I don't know what it is, James.
Have you had any therapy? Have you had any talking?
Yeah. I went to the local... when Gad got diagnosed, when it got to its height, I'll tell you the symptoms, and the worse it became... I had pins and needles down my left arm. I had an elevated pulse. I was breathing heavy. I had sweats. And every symptom was towards having a heart attack, every symptom. I phoned 111. They got the ambulance came out, took me in, and by the good fortune of God, by massive good fortune, the A&E department locally had a Navy medic in placement.
Oh, gosh.
The Navy, it was pure good fortune, honestly. That man was a saint. The Navy medic listened to me. I sobbed my heart out. The Navy medic listened to me, took blood tests, reassured me there was no heart attack. But after listening to me, he said, Sean, you have got a generalised anxiety disorder. I've seen it a million times in the forces. Being a medic, I see it. And it was him. And once I had a name for it, it's like a school bully. You can fight it.
Gosh.
Gosh. In the 14 months I was away, I just want to give you something positive, James.
Go on.
In the 14 months I was away, prior to COVID, I'd never even really heard of LBC. I discovered you guys. Honestly, I discovered you guys during COVID. I listened to you avidly, and you guys were my link to reality, and thank you for that.
We kept you in touch with home.
Yeah.
What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing. Well, I'm sorry that it had to happen in such unpleasant circumstances. And I don't know whether I'm sorry for what I'm about to say as well, and I'm not the only one saying it. There's quite a few people getting in touch to say exactly the same thing. You sound like a really lovely man, Sean, a really lovely man, and I'm really sorry for what you're going through.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. And thank you, listeners. Thank you.
Well, you take care, all right?
Bye-bye. Bye.
And what you highlight is the thing that this whole hour has taught us, that it feels right, yeah? Almost certainly, but correlation is not causation, and causation is going to be very hard to prove. But if there is causation, if these experiences, whether you were infected or not, have had a measurable impact upon our cognitive function and our general mental well-being, then how big a part might that play in the questions that we find ourselves asking together every day with increasing frequency about the people who can't work if you're of a sympathetic mien, or won't work if you're not of a sympathetic mien, and the idea of what is different now from what life was like when we were their age might actually have really big and somewhat obvious answers. I want to talk about Ozzy Osbourne next, with your permission.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. I wonder what the criteria is for determining whether or not, when somebody passes away, we decide to mark their passing with a significant chunk of the show. Listen, sometimes I just get caught up in the moment and I forget even to mention breaking news when it happens on air, and I regret it afterwards, because you can't come back the next day and announce somebody's death because it had happened the previous day. And sometimes it's probably got something to do with timing. Like when the news reaches you, it has a little bit of room to percolate in my mind to a place where I can think, let's do it on the show today. So if they'd announced Ozzy Osbourne's passing 10 minutes ago, I don't know if we'd be turning our attention to his life and times now. Is it because of his West Midlands connection? Is it because he's a Brummie? I don't know. It's certainly growing up in Kidderminster, having superstars, international superstars from just up the road, felt very exciting. And we had quite a lot at the time. ELO, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and plenty more. A little later, we had Duran Duran. And so that maybe speaks, because it's going to be different. There's not going to be an objective algorithm for this, for reflecting. Bowie we did it with, and probably easier for people not familiar with the oeuvre of Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath to understand why you might dedicate an hour to the cultural contribution of Ozzy Osbourne. And so there is something that worries me as well here. And I don't know what you think about this. In fact, I'll ask you to tell me what you think about this. He had a level of self-awareness that was magnificent. But an awful lot of people listening to this are only really going to know him as a consequence of the reality television show that he did with his family. Was it the very first one? Was it At Home with the Osbournes? Was it the very first one? And there were times watching it, and listen, by all means, pull me up on this one, but there were times watching it where it felt a tiny little bit exploitative. He didn't seem to be fully aware always. He was always self-aware, but he didn't always seem to be fully aware of what was going on around him. But it propelled the entire family, including his wife, who previously I think had been something of a sort of management figure, more of a backroom figure. It propelled them all to levels of fame. It re-established him as a major international star, and it created stardom for his children. Was it Kelly and Jack, who always came across as perfectly lovely? But there were moments where you sort of thought, would we have had the Kardashians if we had never had the Osbournes? I should have checked the dates before I asked that question, because if it turns out the Kardashians came before the Osbournes, then I've just made a right Herbert of myself. But they didn't. I know they didn't. I know in my bones that they didn't. The Osbournes feels to me like the very first one. Like the first time that you had a sense that the camera was just hanging around in a room with these people, and that they often forgot that it was there. Would we have had The Office? Were they the first famous people? Did it start with, like, the airlines? Do you remember the fly-on-the-wall documentary? It would go to an airline or a car hire office and start. I need the chronology, don't I, of reality in television. And then The Office mocked the documentaries by setting it in a paper factory, a paper. Yeah, it was a factory, wasn't it? Because her boyfriend worked on the shop floor. I honestly don't know, but I worry slightly that his legacy may have been polluted by the programme. So let's make a list of the questions that we're going to ask. And the first one is for the fans. The first one is for the stands, for the hardcore. How significant a figure musically was the great and now late Ozzy Osbourne? 0345 6060 973. I enjoyed that conversation we had the other day about whether or not Oasis deserved a place in the pantheon. And this, I think, is less debatable in his case. He obviously deserves a place in the pantheon of metal, of heavy metal. But how significant was he beyond that? How big was his contribution to music in general and that genre in particular? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And then I want to ask something about the TV programme. And I suppose the first question is, as a big fan of Ozzy Osbourne's, do you think it damaged his legacy a little bit? Does it upset you that he is likely to be remembered as a slightly addled sweetheart, as opposed to a rock and roll or a heavy rock, a heavy metal super legend? I am going to play a bit of Paranoid shortly, just to get you all in the mood for this. So that would be question number 2. Am I going a bit soft, or am I overthinking it when I say that in some ways his musical legacy might have been polluted a bit by his late stage television celebrity? And then I don't think anyone can answer the next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How much damage did the Osbournes do to popular culture? Not as a family, but that programme. Has it been a force for good or for ill? Because he was famous and brilliant at what he did, albeit that he was past his prime by the time the cameras arrived in his house. When they started sticking cameras in the homes and the lives of people who weren't particularly good at anything, creating, if you like, the cult of the influencer. I don't really know what the Kardashians do to this day. But would you have had the Kardashians if you'd never had the Osbournes? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. There's quite a lot going on here. Explain to people, because that's the way you can knit all these questions together, isn't it? You want a proper fan to explain to people who think he was just a funny bloke off reality television, who sometimes seem to struggle to know what day it was, why he should be remembered as much, much, much more than that. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And if we need to, or if you want to, we could get into the question then of what damage, if that's the right word to use, has been done to, or okay, so you've got the influence of Ozzy. Take the numbers now, you will get through. And then I want you to talk to me about the influence of the programme, the influence of the reality television programme, and whether that has been a force for ill or for good. I'd be happy if the conversation doesn't get beyond the influence of Ozzy, to be honest with you. But I think that the reason why I worry that his legacy might not be what it should be is precisely because that there will be a number of people listening to this who aren't really even aware of his legendary musical status, except insofar as it justified the arrival of all the cameras in his life. I saw him recently. What was the big gig that was going on? And there was an Ozzy. It was Glastonbury. Glastonbury was going on in Somerset, and then in Birmingham, they had a big tribute to Ozzy Osbourne only about a fortnight ago. I mean, very poignant timing when you think about it. And everybody from the world of proper rock, as you might call it, turned up. And everybody treated him like not just an elder statesman, but like an architect of the entire genre. It really brought home, even people that had never met him before, it really brought home what it delivered. I'm going to say something else to you as well that I've never said before. The metal community, which I have just dabbled with, I don't laugh, in my life, is one of the nicest places you could ever imagine. One of the nicest environments created, even as they are headbanging in the mosh pit at their gatherings. That there is if my daughters decided to get into metal, I would have absolutely no reservations whatsoever about sending them off to concerts with a spring in their step. Everybody I know in that world, and it may be that my experience has been particularly blessed, but everybody I know in that world has been really nice people, the men and the women. And of course, it's a world that once you're in it, you can become completely immersed in it. It will define how you dress, how you socialise, who you hang out with. As subcultures go, metal might be one of the most enveloping subcultures of them all, but that possibly is a bit too much to get into on a Wednesday afternoon. Let's begin with the significance of his legacy and the question of how that television programme has affected or will affect the memory of the man. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's coming up to 12:15. If you didn't know he'd passed away, then I probably should have given you a slightly slower build-up to the point. But I think the news has been around I woke up to it, so I think the news has been around for long enough for me to presume that everybody had already heard it. But depending on your age, in part, of course, you may not have ever heard this. So he did something that no one else had ever done before, and I'm not immersed enough in the subculture to know exactly what it was. I'm also a bit older because he got going in the late 60s. I wasn't born until 1972. I'm also conscious that my accent might slip during the course of this conversation, and my West Midlands roots might start emerging a bit more than they do most of the time. But, oh, man, what a shame. What a shame. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need to tell me what his legacy will be.
James O'Brien on LBC.
All right, here is a question for you, trivia fans. When I said to Keith a moment ago, can we play that again? What links that moment in this show to yesterday's... When did we have the conversation about the water industry? Was that on Monday? Or was that yesterday? Monday. What links... So when I said to Keith a moment ago, can we play that again? What links that moment in this show to Monday's conversation about the water industry and the shocking amounts of sewage in our waterways and the hemorrhaging of cash since that? That was the conversation we had. And then just a few moments ago, I said to Keith, can we play that again, please? And he said, no. And I wonder if anybody listening will be able to knit together those two particular points. If you can, I will give you the money myself. 17 after 12 is the time. Ozzy Osbourne is no longer with us. And I don't think it's disrespectful. Sarah worries that it is. And I've read your message, Sarah, and then unfortunately I managed to lose it. But I'm not being disrespectful. I think it's perfectly reasonable to suggest that for generations of people, the impact of his musical career will have been slightly overshadowed for chronological reasons and possibly slightly spoiled by his reality television career. 18 after 12 is the time. Mark is in Collindale. Mark, what have you got?
Oh, sorry, I've got to take your speakerphone. Okay, morning. I just want to share with everyone, I think my favourite Ozzy story. Where was I? I was in the market.
No, that was the last hour. That was the last hour, Mark. Keep up.
Sorry.
Go on.
No, I was at the Marquee. We called it the New Marquee, Charing Cross Road, after the Wardour.
Yes.
Wardour Street one closed down. It was sort of late. It must have been about 89. He did a secret gig there, Ozzy. And so we turned up, and we're in the foyer having a beer. And, God, like an hour before he's on stage, the crowd are already going, Ozzy, Ozzy. Little did anyone know he wasn't even in the venue, because he was still on the sherbets at the time.
Right.
And a few minutes later, this massive roadie walked in with Ozzy underneath one arm, dragging him. Ozzy in a purple felt top hat, just comatose. Just dragged him into the venue. And we're like, oh, Ozzy's been out. Okay. So we walked in, got ready for it. Anyway, they got him vaguely conscious, and they put like this plastic dustbin full of water. I don't know how it didn't short everything out, but they put it on the front of the stage, and they must have just like opened the door, thrown him out, and he's there, and he staggers up to the front, picked up this dustbin of water, put it over his head, shook it off, straight up to the microphone. Hello, London. We love you all. And just went into it. It was incredible. What a front man, what a guy.
And did it, I mean, I don't want to sound like a old misery guts or a killjoy, but you're describing someone who was clearly, and it's well documented, he had extraordinary problems with alcoholism and substance abuse.
Yes, he did.
But did he still smash it that night? Did he still?
Absolutely.
Good Lord.
I think the adrenaline of playing the music, it was great as a secret gig. They did a load of old Sabbath stuff as well, so the crowd was...
So what did he have that hadn't been around before?
Whether it hadn't been around before, but he had a love for what he did. Just the spirit. I remember seeing an interview with him, and he was saying, like, originally he was in blues bands and he was supposed to stand there all sullen and just sing it, and he couldn't do it. He was jumping around because he loved it so much. But it's what he did. He loved it that much, and he just got like he was always like, say, a 13-year-old kid getting overexcited.
But you know, and I know, and it's don't worry because we've got at least another half an hour to discuss this with other people. But that doesn't actually fill the space that I've I mean, what is his legacy? He was like a 13-year-old kid who was always really excited. Isn't quite reaching the parts, mate, is it, Mark?
Well, well, if we're going to talk legacy,
yes.
if we get that, then Sabbath started everything with heavy music. They started everything. You hear obituaries and all these people go, oh, look, they were a pioneer and did this. But him and the rest of Sabbath were pure pioneers. You wouldn't have pretty much any heavy band, and they certainly wouldn't sound like they do.
I wonder why that was. Why do we know why that was? I mean, it's probably more, and I never know for sure how to pronounce his surname, but Tommy Iommi was the...
Yeah, the riff master.
But so the musical...
Yeah,
vision was his, but Osborne brought something that we hadn't.
No, because you have the riff and then you have the vocal melody, and all of those were Ozzy's. And what they did, generally driving between gig to gig, Tony would come out with a riff, and Ozzy would just sing rubbish on top of it as a vocal melody. And it's true. And then the bassist Geezer Butler, because they'd record that and he'd make sense of the lyrics and then write out the lyrics properly. And that's how they made songs. So Ozzy is as much a part of that as all of them.
Are you sure, just to tie this in with the conversation we had in the last hour about our brain slowing down, are you sure it was in 1989?
No, but
I think it was
around then.
I think it was the 18th of January 1991.
There you go.
Because Chris has just sent me a ticket.
Oh, fantastic. I probably still have the ticket, you know. There you go.
A riotous night, he says, and this is the very gig that your caller is talking about. That's lovely. That's a lovely start. And we want more. You want more. I mean, to the uninitiated, and possibly the people. I should have asked Mark a bit about this. Possibly the people who only know him from that programme. And listen, it wasn't an unalloyed bad thing. His love for his kids was a beautiful thing to witness on that show. It really was nice. But imagine if that's all you know about him at this stage in your life, as his life comes to an end. Can I tell you another secret as well? So when Mark was talking, I just had this overwhelming sense of regret that I never got him on full disclosure. That's such a strange thing to feel, but when someone's had an incredible life, they make for the most wonderful guests, and it's such a privilege sometimes to be able to sit down with them and pick over those lives. Mark, stay safe. Ross is in Leighton Buzzard. Ross, what do you reckon?
Oh, hi there, James. Pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
Without Black Sabbath, Ozzy, Tony, Geezer and Bill... heavy metal just wouldn't have existed whatsoever. So
how do we know that? How do you know that?
Because all those bands tell us. I was at the farewell gig on the 5th of July in Villa Park, and some huge major bands there that all attribute their success and their reason for their existence to Black Sabbath. They just did something a little bit different. They took blues and rock and wanted to make a little bit more of a scarier music, because I think they were intrigued on how horror movies scared people.
Oh, okay.
And so that's the direction their writing went in. And once they started doing it, they realised how amazing it sounded, really.
So and I'm going to go full anorak this hour, I'm not making any apology for it. Who were their key influences then?
Well, Ozzy always says the Beatles.
Does he? So you think Paul McCartney and Helter Skelter, some would argue, was the first ever sort of...
but the other guys, I think, were heavily into things like Jethro Tull, obviously the Beatles,
Led Zeppelin?
Yeah, well, they were good mates with John Bonham and a couple of the guys from Led Zeppelin. So
you know where John Bonham grew up, don't you, Ross?
Yeah, near your neck of the woods.
Kidderminster, mate. Well, pretty much Kidderminster. And Robert Plant, they were childhood friends.
Yeah, and I know John Bonham was the best man at Tony Iommi's wedding as well.
So that I love those rock family trees. I don't know if they actually ever played in the same bands together, but the idea that they all supped from the same trough, as it were, and that must have been such an extraordinary time to be in Birmingham. It really must, and to have been in the Midlands when you're actually setting the tone for the entire world. God, who gets the prize for paying attention today? It's Davey. Didn't your mum know John Bonham's mum? Writes Davey, and to which the answer is a categorical yes. Yes, indeed she did. I'll tell you the full story one day. 25 minutes after 12 is the time. A few of you pointing out that Ozzy might not have made the best full disclosure guest in his later years, and you might well have a point. But it may also be that wondering whether or not his legacy has been in any way corrupted by or spoiled slightly by the reality programme is not a question that we need to trouble ourselves with today. About 5 people got the correct answer to the question of what linked me saying to Keith after playing a quick snatch of Paranoid, a quick clip of Paranoid, one of Black Sabbath's most famous songs, and then saying what links that to the conversation we had in the first hour of the week on this programme together, which was about the water industry. And 4 or 5 people have actually got that right. More than I perhaps expected. But I'm going to give you more than perhaps expected. But no, it's nothing to do with anybody singing backing vocals for Black Sabbath or with anybody's campaign on artist royalties. Ian got it, Chris got it, Charlie got it. And Josh speaks for many of you when he writes, I can't say I ever thought that I'd be listening to Black Sabbath on a James O'Brien show. I wish they'd let me play records more. But then it would cease to be leading Britain's conversation, wouldn't it? Linda's in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's not that far from Sabbath country. Linda, what would you like to say?
Hi, no, you're not wrong there, James. Basically, I've been an Ozzy fan since the beginning, right back in the 60s, late 60s, so I've kind of given away my age. It was on my bucket list to go see him. I wanted desperately to see him live. Yeah. But because of certain disability issues on my own, it made it difficult.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Still quite ashamed now after... Yeah, I know. Makes me feel guilty.
What did you like about it? I mean, why would a young woman, a very young woman in the Midlands in the late 60s be drawn to this peculiar outfit?
Mainly because I love music. I love all music, every genre of music. And when Black Sabbath and Ozzy burst onto our screens and onto our radios, that was something different. And fell in love with it instantly and became an instant fan. And I just wanted to listen to whatever he put out. And later on, in later years, he did such a wide choice of whatever he wanted. You know, heavy metal, beautiful ballads from the one he did with Kelly.
He could sing a nice ballad as well, couldn't he? You're right. What did you think of the TV show? You mentioned his daughter.
The TV show, of course, being a massive fan and totally in love with the guy, I enjoyed it, and I think it humanised him. I think we all saw that he was just an ordinary guy. You know, some of these big superstars get a little bit, you know what I'm saying?
I do.
But he was a basic, down-to-earth.
That's a really interesting thing, because he was not remotely ordinary in many ways, and yet in other ways he was almost unbelievably ordinary as well. The dogs. Did you ever see the clip of him at the Grand Prix? When for some reason he was in the pit lane at the Grand Prix, and one of the interviewers spotted him. Have you ever heard that clip?
I don't think I have. I might have done.
So the interviewer, it was a wonderful moment of the interviewer not knowing what to do. And I guess if you're on a job like that, Linda, you see someone like Ozzy Osbourne at the Grand Prix, like Formula One, you know, the racing cars, and you think, crikey, that's Ozzy Osbourne over there. I'll go and talk to him. So he had a brief chat with him, and at the end of it, he said, "So, are the dogs with you?" So this must have been during the heyday of the TV show, mustn't it? Because the dogs had become like supporting characters. Yeah. And I can't say the word that he used, but he said on live television in the middle of a Grand Prix broadcast, he went, "No, they're at home, pooing all over the place," or something like that. Our TV had to drop it immediately. That's what I mean about being completely ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Thank you, Linda, and take care. It might have been Martin Brundle doing the interview. I just went a bit Partridge, didn't I? Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Was it funny? Was it to go to a gig? Because it's quite camp, the horror stuff. But was it funny? Were they fun? Was he as funny on stage as he could be when he achieved television status later in life? I don't know. 33 minutes after 12. What will be the legacy of Ozzy Osbourne, who, it was announced this morning, has passed away? David is in Ludwell. David, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning to you. Obviously, I'm hugely sad about Ozzy's passing, but I had the privilege of working with him for some years as his recovery coach and did several tours and world tours. And
he took you with him, did he, David?
Yeah, that was part of the support network.
Yeah.
And we worked really well together. But we knew each other from the 60s. I used to be in an ancient black and white TV show called Crossroads, and Sabbath and The Moon.
This is Birmingham royalty queuing up in front of me.
Yeah, but I'm an ex-Londoner down in the country boy now. But we met then, and it was an exciting time, probably like Manchester was with the music explosion more recently.
Yeah.
But it was all happening. Anyway, but Ozzy, we were mates, and then we ended up working together from about 2010, on and off, not all the time.
Sure.
And he was great, but I was also at stage school with Sharon when I was a sort of show-off type, attention-seeking child.
Is that how they found you? Is that how they found you when they decided he needed help?
Well, what they knew is that I had experience of my own recovery and that I've worked with performers and I wasn't overwhelmed by the fame element. But the thing is, he was not only, we know he was talented, even the funniest person I've ever toured with in my life. And we had great common interests, just silly things like Carry On movies and Sid James. And he was a great historian. He never stopped watching history, Second World War history. So there was that side of Ozzy, but he continued to make me laugh, bless him. And I got a text from him about 10 days ago. We were planning to meet up, but what more can I say? But I did want to say what's upset me the most is some AI stuff already out there with somebody purporting to be Ozzy speaking. It's clearly not him. I know it's not him. I know. And it's somebody means well, but it's disturbing.
I remember watching him hug his son on the telly when he was watching the World War II documentaries. He'd put his arms around Jack, wouldn't he? Put his arm around Jack. Speaking of the history, you are, and my Google detective work, you are David Charkham.
Yes, you've got me in one. Guilty.
Milad. Was he funny on stage as well?
He was funny on stage, but he was locked into performance, totally focused on his performance. But I heard an interview today that Tony Iommi, who's also a gentleman, and he said Ozzy would often turn upstage and put grimacing, full faces and gurn just to laugh, because sometimes I'd travel with him in a small plane with just the three originals, and these were school friends.
Yeah,
these were school friends from Aston, and everyone worked in factories.
Gosh.
In fact, that's how it all was. But Ozzy, Dad did day shifts, Mum did night shifts. That was how they sort of survived up there then.
Gosh. And finally, when you were working with him on his recovery, would you be almost like a sort of bouncer for substances, or would you be doing more therapeutic work? How would that work?
It was therapeutic. I'm not a bouncer for substances. People make their individual decisions whether they want to stop.
They have to, don't they?
And I stopped working for people whose record companies or managers wanted them to stop.
Right. But they didn't want to stop themselves.
No. And
that must be...
There's all sorts of problems.
Yes, I can well imagine.
It's not what I choose to do, but anyway, I just wanted to air my feelings about.
I'm glad you did, and David, I'm sorry for your loss. Actually, obviously,
thank you.
It meant a lot to you, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing those those thoughts with us. 12:37 is the time. Before you go, just to establish my Birmingham credentials, my sister's best friend at school was Jill Chance's daughter.
Jill Chance? Do you mean from this Crossroads?
Yes.
What a small world.
Smallish, perhaps.
I think that's another interview. Roger Tongue, who plays Sandy, was my closest buddy, but that's another programme.
Indeed it is. Thank you. Fady is, if I've pronounced that correctly, is in Hemel Hempstead. Fady, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Obligatory, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
I pulled over on the motorway, not on the motorway, I pulled into the service station.
Glad you've clarified that you're not parked up on a hard shoulder with the hazard lights
on. Not just on the lay-by.
No, carry on.
So I was at the show 2.5-3 weeks ago. I've been, a lifetime rock and heavy metal fan. It was sort of this first music that ever really spoke to me.
Really? And, how old are you?
I'm 31.
Wow.
I started probably getting into that maybe when I was maybe 10, 11, 12, and it was like Iron Maiden and Metallica and all this stuff. And then obviously you start getting more into the history of it and you branch out. But so I was at the show a few weeks ago, and I mean, the atmosphere there was just incredible. I'm not ashamed to admit, so I'm 31 years old now, beards, 90 kilos, 6'2", and I was bawling on stage. And you look around, there were so many people were so emotional.
Can you tell me why? Do you know why? And sometimes it's a mistake to ask. Just feel it. Run with the feelings. Don't try and analyse them. But I've asked now.
Yeah,
do you know why?
Mean, it was, I don't know. I mean, I'd never seen him before, and he was, to me, always this, like, legend.
Yes.
And, like you were saying, he obviously had the TV show and all this stuff, and you were saying as well, do you think that sort of, I can't remember the word used, but...
Knock the gloss off a bit, maybe it's changed, spoiled his legacy slightly. I'm only asking, I'm not suggesting that it did.
No, I mean, I don't really think so, because it really sort of highlighted what a normal, which, I mean, you said it with one of your previous callers, you said normal in quotations, because he was a very abnormal man, but it highlighted what sort of normal sort of guy he was, like a sort of working class guy, he really loved his wife, really loved his kids. He wasn't this big rock and roll thing off stage. He was just,
It's a bit of a wally, really. He was a bit of a wally, really. That's what made him so lovable. Were a lot of people overwhelmed when he came onto the stage?
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of people. You look around, so many people crying. And if you look back on the videos from when it was Ozzy's set, and then he done, obviously, the set with Black Sabbath, if you look back on the videos, every time it pans to somebody in the crowd, they're crying.
Is that because it felt like a farewell at the time?
It really did feel like a farewell. And then I think people have this impression of Ozzy. When you think about him, you probably remember him how you do on the show, in terms of how he'd move around and sort of how he was that sort of thing. But to see him, he obviously, it's been known for a while, he's had Parkinson's, he's had issues with his back. To see him, like, he was seated the whole show. I'd read, apparently he was strapped into the chair. I don't know how true that was. But apparently that was just because they thought he's going to get, really excited and get up and then hurt himself. I don't know how true that was. But you could see, like, how much joy it brought him to make that performance. You could see his face lighting up when people were...
God, you're going to set me off now, because we often think that funerals are sort of doubly poignant, because you want the person who's passed to see how much love is in the room at a funeral, and he had the whole of Villa Park essentially showing him how much love there was for how he lived his life and for what he gave people like you as a 31-year-old bloke in Hemel Hempstead.
Yeah, I think he really felt it that day. And we were saying, we saw what poor health he's in, and when we saw that at the show, I think that was very sad, and people were saying, you don't think he's got long. Obviously, no one expected it's going to be 2.5, 3 weeks.
No, but thank God he made that, because if it meant a lot to you, imagine what it meant to him and to his family. Fady, thank you, mate. Thank you. Russell's in Brighton. Sorry, James, but he won't even know I ever read this out, or he might do, as you'll discover at the end of this message. Sorry, James, but playing Paranoid just now made me want to listen to Sabbath, so now War Pigs is blasting out rather than your show. I will listen back later on Catch Up, though. I wish there was some way I could not tell him what the link was between me saying to Keith when I played Paranoid, can we play that again, and the phone-in about water that we had on Monday. And the answer... Well, the answer, in a way, is Fergal Sharkey via John Peel. Have you worked it out yet? About half a dozen people did in the end. And the simple explanation is that the most famous example, I think, of a radio DJ, and obviously I'm not a DJ, I wish, the most famous example of a radio DJ saying, let's play it again, came when John Peel played Teenage Kicks by the Undertones on his BBC Radio 1 show in, I don't know, the 70s or 80s. And that's what I said to Keith, can we play it again? And the lead singer of the Undertones, boys and girls, was Fergal Sharkey. So there is the answer to your question of what links me saying to Keith 45 minutes ago. Can we play that again? And the conversation we had about sewage and water companies in the first hour together of this week on Monday. The answer is Fergal Sharkey, who has, of course, latterly become a tireless and inimitable campaigner in the field of improving the water industry. Back to Ozzy. Andy's in Staines. Andy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I'm a long-time listener and a big fan of yours.
Thank you, Andy.
This has been a little bit like all our yesterdays in music for me. Quite funny, really. I know David Sarkin very well as well. So it's been very personal.
It's a terrible phone line. I don't know what's happened since you spoke to the producer, Andy, and I'm conscious of wanting to hear what it is that you said. So I might come back to you at the top of the next section if we can just improve that phone line. But I do have a guest that I need to speak to as well. But thank you for that. It's coming up to 1:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:47 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is, even in a context of headlines that you can't quite believe, this is one that should stop anybody in their tracks. More than 100 humanitarian groups warn of mass starvation in Gaza. This is over 100 international aid organisations and human rights groups issuing warnings of mass starvation, as the headline explains, and pressing for governments to take more action. One of those organisations is Médecins Sans Frontières, and Dr. Joanne Perry is a doctor with them, currently based in the Al-Hilal Hospital in Gaza City, and she joins me now, obviously on a line that may be a little unreliable. It's hard to know where to start, Joanne, so forgive me if this is crass, but just how bad is the situation with particular relevance to nutrition and starvation?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share the situation on the ground here, because it's truly catastrophic. This is my third time into Gaza in the last year, and I just can't begin to tell you how we're seeing the suffering of the population and how access to food is extremely limited.
And what are the visible consequences of those limits? I mean, particularly with reference to the last time you were there, what are you seeing now that you didn't see then?
So if we talk initially about the local staff that we're working with, they physically appear thinner. They and their large extended families are now surviving on one meal a day. 3 days ago, there was zero food in the market in Gaza City, so our staff did not eat for 2 days. And at the same time, the organization that provides food for the patients and staff at Al-Hilal Hospital ran out of supplies of food. So they were not fed also for 2 days. So basically, they're surviving the local population day to day on what they can find in the market, and one meal is a good day. Go ahead.
No, you carry on. Forgive me.
As you know, the rates of malnutrition are climbing weekly for all the vulnerable groups, children under 5, the pregnant and breastfeeding mothers, the elderly, and the numbers of people being formally admitted into nutrition supplement programs is just becoming astronomical.
And I've read that aid workers are now joining the same food lines that are full of families. And of course, we know, well, in fact, I'll read the statement from the 109 humanitarian organisations that's been issued this morning. As the Israeli government's siege starves the people of Gaza, aid workers are now joining the same food lines, risking being shot just to feed their families.
Exactly. So the distribution in the GHF is not humane in any way, shape, or form. And it is heartbreaking to hear our own staff do the risk analysis of, do I take the risk to go to those distributions, or do I let my family starve? And this is exactly what is happening in front of us.
How does it end, Joanne? I'm sorry for asking you that question, but I mean, is there light at the end of the tunnel without some huge retrenchment from the Israeli administration?
No, this is not something that needs to be solved over the next weeks. It needs to be solved over the next hours, because there's a trickle of aid coming in. As the statement you have in front of you says, like 28 trucks a day. Prior to the conflict and during the ceasefire, it was 500 trucks a day.
Good Lord. And a word, if you would, on the work that you're actually doing, and how hard that has become since you were last there, or since you were first there, and the impact that the growing malnutrition has upon a patient's ability to recover or to respond to treatment.
So in our maternity hospital, we have about 10% of our pregnant women who are malnourished, and it puts them at risk of complications of their pregnancy, which is why right now in our neonatal intensive care unit, which is mostly premature babies, we're at, instead of 12 baby capacity this morning, there was 22 babies. So just overcrowding everywhere, increased pressure on the remaining health systems, and as you point out, the malnourished are more subject to infections and to complications from any of their chronic diseases.
And there are reports that 33 people have already died from malnutrition in the last 48 hours, including 12 children.
I was just on the phone just before this interview with there's 2 centers in north of Gaza for the severely malnourished children that require admission. One center that has 12 beds already in July has had 5 deaths. They had no deaths in June, but already in July they've had 5 deaths. And
they can be, for want of a better word, confident that malnutrition is the cause.
No, they were admitted to the malnutrition ward.
Forgive me.
Yes. Yes.
And so that number is only going to climb, one presumes, without the kind of action you've called for within hours as opposed to days.
Yes, without some kind of opening of the borders and more aid and food coming in, it's inevitable. And none of us even want to think about it. This food crisis for many of us experienced humanitarian workers is really a tipping point.
When you say experienced, could you tell me some of the other places that you've been where you didn't actually encounter this particular crisis? I've worked in Iraq, I've worked in Syria, I've worked in Congo, I've worked in Ethiopia, and clearly when you have displaced populations, there's going to be some food insecurity. But this particular situation is weaponization of food, because there is food on the other side of the border waiting to come in, and it's being blocked. And that is a crucial distinction between this and other crises of feeding, food crises and nutrition crises that you've witnessed.
That I've witnessed, yes.
Final question: How are you?
Thank you for asking. It's a tough stint, Gaza. Our staff, patients, they're welcoming, they're resilient, but it's just they're losing hope. And we try to focus on the patient needs and the ones we can help. But sometimes it's discouraging because there's just so many obstacles and constraints to providing the type of care we want. And when our patients and our staff come in and say they haven't eaten for 2 days, it feels hopeless.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, and take care and good luck.
Thank you for your time.
Dr. Joanne Perry, a doctor based in, as you heard, the Al Halou Hospital in Gaza City, and she is there by dint of the auspices of Médecins Sans Frontières. This statement from 109 international aid organisations, Save the Children, Oxfam, Médecins Sans Frontières, calls explicitly for an immediate ceasefire, the opening of all border crossings, and the free flow of aid led by the UN. We will return to this territory before the end of the week, but something that popped up on yesterday's programme that really stuck with me was the suggestion that independently of Israel, the United Kingdom government could be doing more. I saw one person who, seems to know what they're talking about, pointing out that we have military bases in Cyprus, and I mean, it feels like something from a different age, but dropping packages or dropping food from our planes into this territory now is something that you'd hope the politicians here and elsewhere in Europe were actively considering. I don't know, and I apologise if that was a stupid thing to repeat, but I don't know whether or not the logistics of that are feasible. But I do know that the people who are going there, the medics in particular, who are going there to help alleviate and ameliorate utterly intolerable and unbearable circumstances, deserve, untold levels of admiration and gratitude. But of course, you'll never hear them either claim or admit to that. We are almost out of time, and it is something of a crunching gear change, but that is the nature of the time that we spend together every day. So I am returning to the question of Ozzy Osbourne's passing and what he meant, how significant a figure he was, and of course what his legacy would be. And Amanda is in the cradle of Black Sabbath itself, Birmingham. Amanda, what would you like to say?
Well, I think I felt a lot of what you have sort of expressed, actually, in terms of I'm not a Black Sabbath fan, and I thought it was a bit of a wally. I think that's an absolutely perfect kind of word for what I think. But I got invited for various reasons to him receiving his Freedom of the City Award.
Oh, yes.
And actually had a front row seat, which was really incredible and amazing. And it's completely changed my view of him as a person. He was incredibly unwell and quite physically compromised, but did the most amazing speech about the luck of being the person he was, and spoke about how his father went into debt in order for him to have his first microphone, the complete chance meeting of them all as a 4 or initially as a 3, and it was just very, very beautiful. And being in a room with so many other people who were obviously just thrilled to be there, and then having gone and seen the Working Class Hero exhibit at the Birmingham Museum, it has transformed my understanding of him and his importance. He's a very, very clever man. He's a very, very funny man, and someone who clearly battled throughout his life all his various demons and won. And I feel incredibly sad today, which is not something I would have said 4 weeks ago if he died. So I feel quite sort of transformed by the whole thing.
Well, you've conveyed that perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a lovely moment. Thank you, Amanda. I wish I'd been at that ceremony. It sounds like an absolute stormer. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player and, of course, the LBC app. You can stay up to date on the top stories and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. So do download the official LBC app for free from your app store. Tom Sorbitt will be with you at 4 on LBC, but now, big Ozzy Osbourne fan?
No, but I was really interested in what that last caller said,
lovely,
because I
she?
suspect if I took the time to do what she did, I'd probably feel the same.
Humanity.
You never got any sense of bad stuff from him, did you?
No, you didn't.
No.
James O'Brien on LBC.